historically, you have you have people like Simon Bolivar. You know, he's responsible for establishing Colombia, Venezuela, pretty much most of South America. And one thing about people like him and other other great leaders or people of wealth, they had a wife, they had wives, but they also had mistresses as well. And so back in the times where there were kingdoms and things of that nature, um, men always had you know illegitimate children. But when you read their biographies, the people in the biographies are usually the husband, the wife, and his kids. Now he could have had 10 other kids on the side, hundreds of kids on the side, whatever the case may be. But for legacy and for the ones who can take over the throne, those are always people or kids that bore his name. And the reason for that was because historically and still today in a lot of communities, your name means value. Men men have always wanted to protect their name and protect their legacy. You'll never you'll never heard of a side piece or a concubine, a whore, never getting shine. They were always in the back, in the background. And that history, that's traditional values. That's always been traditional values of men. What's good, Zero the Hero? What's good, John Horse? So I give you an example. So a lot like Colombia, for example, or even DR, some of these Latin countries, right? You know, some of the chicas that's in the game that do sex work, they do it discreetly because they don't want to embarrass their family. A lot of times they go away from their home city and go to another city to do what they got to do, to make money. I've met women that was Catholic that go to church all the time. Family has no idea. You look on a social media page, they Facebook, they look like good wholesome girls because they don't want to embarrass their family name. They don't want the name to be tarnished by their actions. You know what I mean? So in Latin cultures, even in Latin cultures today, the name is very important. In Asian cultures, your name is important. People name wants to be their name want to be associated with a certain level of education or profession. Politics. Africa, your name is so important. Most of the world, your name is so important. And so why, when it comes to men, especially Black American men, we don't have any pride in our name? Why is that? Why is that? Why isn't your name important? Why are men okay with um muddying up their name to a certain, to a certain extent? So that's one question I have. The second thing is that and I got it up here. Are we hypocrites when it comes to traditional value? Because I'm gonna keep it a bean. You know what I mean? A lot of us be on, you know, our women in the US neck about not being traditional. And, a lot of us still, want the traditional situation where, men have their traditional roles and women have their traditional roles. And when a lot of guys kick, scream, and holler, shame, blame, and explain the lack of values, traditional values women have, but I'm starting to see a lack of traditional values men used to have. And it's about the name. So I'm gonna give an example, a modern example of a culture that protects their name. So in the Middle East, for example, the Middle East does something unique. Most of the Middle Eastern countries are predominantly Muslim countries, but they do have legalized form of prostitution. So you got Dubai, Bahrain, Lebanon, and if it's more, it's probably more, but they don't let their women prostitute. You don't see Arab women out there doing that. They import Eastern Europeans, Africans, Asians, pretty much, chicks from the US get flued out, and you hear about all these lewd acts or whatever for loads of money. And my point is that they protect an image. It's very important. It's very important for a lot of reasons. It's very important for respect, because respect gains you status, and status gains you opportunities. And once you amass a certain level of status and wealth, it's perpetual. You can pass that down from generation to generation. That is how generations survive. Unlike the United States, we don't live in a caste system, so wealth can be created from somebody that came from nothing. So, using this Middle Eastern example, and this is something I found out, is what a lot of men do is that instead of practicing polygamy, which they can through religion, some of them don't want to deal with multiple wives, and so they will you know indulge in prostitution in their company. I'm sorry, in their country, and that stuff is kept secret because of their name. They don't put it out there like that. If you've seen videos of the Dominican Republic, for example, or even a Latin country, and there's been videos where, let's say, a daughter was discovered doing something, a lewd act, and her father or uncles or brothers will publicly, I don't want to say the word, but they will publicly, um they will embarrass her, physically record it, things of that nature, because of the name. It's supposed to be an embarrassment and shame. So if guys are really, so here's the thing, right? So guys can't play both sides. Can't play both sides and say, hey, I believe women should be more traditional, but at the same time, guys are not being traditional. And then guys can't really have you know, a lot of guys have to kind of look in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm a, you know, they use the term modern woman. A lot of men are modern, you know, are modern men. And I think it's important to make those distinctions because you know, we're all being, a lot of us are all being grouped together, and some men are very traditional and some men are very modern. Shout out to Man of Tomorrow. What up, bro? So even my circle, even my peers, right? So um I'm traditional in the sense of I believe in paying 100% of the bills, right? And my wife, you know, doing domestic things, or you know what I mean, you know, having time to having the time for me for things I need her to do. There's a lot of men in our space that believe in 50-50. It's like, okay, if I make a certain amount of money and she makes comparable amount of money, you know, we should be going 50-50. So you have men, and in my opinion, that's a modern man. That's a modern man. You want to go 50-50, that's cool. I don't have no nothing against that. But I look at, I think that's a modern man at that point when you say 50-50. And the hypocrisy is that guys that want 50-50, they want to complain about women not being traditional. You know what I mean? So that's the conversation that I'm not hearing enough. That's the conversation I'm not hearing. I'm traditional, you know, when it comes to my name. You know what I mean? I don't want my name to be attached to um, you know, a hooker, you know, or you know what I mean, or that's you know what I mean, that's my name when it comes to women that had promiscuous past. I only want to be attached in the sense that uh that was like me having fun, you know, locker room stuff, but not not something that will make my name a disgrace from a traditional viewpoint.